two. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Seven Story Podcast. I'm Natasha Kyler, and I'm here with today's featured author, M.A.Batten. M.A.Batten is a neurodiverse writer of fantasy, science fiction, and dark fiction. After winning over 150 creative awards during a hugely successful 25-year career in advertising, M.A.Batten returned to his childhood dream of telling stories, but without brands or their ridiculous reasons to buy. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, as you said, a career in advertising as a creative. So the guy who would come up with the ideas for ads across the entire spectrum of marketing, working my way up through to leadership roles, to running agencies, both in Australia and the UK, and running teams in markets all around the world. And what used to be a very creative industry slowly became less and less creative over the last 10, 15 years. And then COVID, like a lot of people, COVID hit and I found myself between jobs. A job I was meant to go to was put on hold. So I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. And what I did was have a look at old stories I had written. And I'd been writing stories since like the age of 13. And it worked out that probably around every 5 to 7 years, I'd started the next big novel. And so I had one from 13 years old. I had one from about 20 years old, about 25 years old, another one from about 32 years old. And I was going back through all these files, and all of them were totally different stories, but they all would get to about chapter 6 or 7, and then I'd stop, and life would get in the way, being a teenager or a young adult, or getting married and having a child, or working, all that sort of stuff. So when I found myself with lots of time on my hands, I opened up the last one that I'd worked on about 7 years earlier and read it and went, I think I've actually got something really good here, and I've got no excuse to not finish it. So I went through and finished the entire thing, went through the editing process, launched that last year, and it's done very well. And that was almost the test. The response of that one has made me go, yeah, I can do this. This is definitely what I should have been doing for the last 35 years.
That's amazing. On your point about the advertising industry getting a little less creative over time, I'm experiencing that now. I see exactly what you're talking about. I'm a recent grad in that field, so yeah.
I'd say have a plan B.
Yes, absolutely. Writing is my plan B right now.
Excellent.
And then you mentioned how you started working on the book, and I assume that book is Dark and the Boy in the Hole.
It is indeed Dark and the Boy in the Hole. The idea for the story was 2 parts. It was wanting to do a fantasy story that was a little bit all ages. The same way that, I know everyone talks about it, the idea that Harry Potter got adults back into reading again. They'd picked up essentially what was a children's book, a middle grade book, and we're going, oh my God, I love reading again. I wanted to capitalize upon the idea of anybody can immerse themselves in a story rather than being pigeonholed in this is for this age. But what I did want to do was have a fantasy that was darker than the Harry Potter series. I wanted to go to places that you normally wouldn't go to for middle grade and young adult, but without crossing the line. Because, seeing through my own daughter and through other children that I know, that they're watching Marvel movies. They're seeing, drama and action and horror and death and all these things in the world. They are prepared for it. So you can go there in stories, but there's a point where you don't cross the line. It's almost, again, the fade to black. In it, there's a character who is, a torturer of children, but don't show it. Just lay the seeds of this is a bad person, and they're taking the children and they're going into the dungeon, and then that's it. And let the reader, their own level of imagination, fill in the blank of what's happening there. And the second part was bringing to life an anti-hero character. So to allow the darkness to really be part of the story, having an anti-hero character who is kind of an interpretation of one of the neurodiversity struggles I've had for a long time, but never realized until probably only about 5 years ago. Part of it is called estrangement, where you don't feel like you fit anywhere, you don't feel like you belong. Even with your own social circles, you find it hard to kind of connect. I overcompensate by being quite extroverted, quite forcefully extroverted in social situations, but that's because I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying so desperately to be noticed and not feel invisible. And so at the heart of this, the boy himself, who has spent his entire life in this hole in the ground, trapped beneath the castle, when he finally gets out, he doesn't actually fit into any of the world around him, whether it be the human side or the monsters who he ends up befriending. And he's torn between these two halves and trying to work out who is he and what is this world that he's suddenly exposed to. And it becomes his adventure of an uprising against humanity. So humans are the bad guys and monsters are the good guys. You want the monsters to win for once. But it's also a story about him having, because he's only ever lived in this hole, he has no concept of fear. He doesn't know what to be afraid of. He's never had those kind of exposures to understand this is bad. Don't go there. Don't touch that. Don't do this. So he has no fear, which is what makes him want to be, the leader of the uprising. But at the same time, that's what gets him into trouble.
So interesting. I love it. And what made you come up with the title Dark?
Like I said, because I want it to be a dark fantasy, but also that ends up being the boy's name. Spoiler alert, not really. They name him Dark because he ends up being nocturnal, because he's lived his entire life in this dark hole. His eyes can't adjust to daylight at all. So he ends up, being nocturnal and siding with what you'd think is the dark side, siding with, his best friends are a minotaur and shape-shifting lichen, this giant wolf, and goblins and trolls. So all the things that classical fantasy taught us, those are the bad guys. He's siding with those, so they become the good guys, and humans are the bad guys, because humans are full of greed and hate and anger and war and all these things.
I love it. I love a twist on what we think is traditionally good and bad.
Yeah.
And I recall you saying that there was a illustrated version of all of the monsters.
Yeah.
We come across.
Yeah. So while I was writing it, I was also doing some screenwriting during this hiatus from work. And that's kind of, if anything, that's kind of what was the launch pad into getting out the novels. And so I write quite visually. The stories I've been told, you can easily just see the pictures unfolding in your mind. And, I've had quite a few readers saying this needs to be made into a movie or a TV series because it's just so viscerally visual. But that's also because part of what I was doing was, as I'm creating the characters, I would sketch them and have mood boards of them and so forth, so that I could make them real for me and stay true to their characters. And then when I'd finished writing it and I was going through the process of discovering the pathways to publication, both traditional and self-publication, it was quite frustrating because you're not creating. And I was thinking, this is really kind of boring me as much as I know it's essential as part of the business. I had this idea of I need to start creating the next thing. And I'm thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I looked up and there's all these pictures and went, that's what I can do. So following that is the Bestiarium Noctis, which is illustrations of all of the creatures that you encounter within the story. And the text within this is a continuation of the story, so that following the events of Dark and the Boy in the Hole, again, not giving anything away, somebody sends out investigators to find out who are these monsters and what are they capable of, what should we be worried about. And this is essentially the encyclopedia they come back with. And then this, as an item, is actually central to the follow-up story, Dark and the Girl with the Knives. So in this one, those same people who commissioned the Bestiarum Noctis, they send an assassin who has a magic ability of never missing. Whatever she aims at, whatever she wants to see, whatever she wants to hit, she will hit dead on. So she is sent to kill the boy. Now, what they don't realize is the boy has the ability to mimic any ability he sees. So he's actually built up a list of abilities from the monsters that he's befriended. So traditionally, goblins, their laughter is able to induce fear. It's able to snuff out candles and bring darkness. All that sort of stuff. So these are things that he can do now. The fact that a minotaur never gets lost in a maze, he just has to see that happening, and now he will never get lost in a maze at all. So he learns from the monsters just by seeing what they do. So when they send a girl who can never miss, obviously there's going to be a big clash. But part of her journey is also discovering who is this boy and what the hell is going on. And so she gets a copy of the Bestiarum Noctis. So the idea is that between reading this one and this one, readers can also get this one and enjoy pictures and immerse themselves into the world. But it also means when they are reading Girl with the Knives, if they've got a copy of this, they can turn to page 32 when she turns to page 32, and they can see exactly what she's seeing. So it becomes quite an immersive adventure for the reader as well.
I love that so much. I could see myself turning through the pages and going, okay, oh, this is going to be fun, and getting so sucked into the whole experience.
Yeah. There's references, certainly when she travels to within the world that I've built, there's a town that is all essentially about, it's a giant library, a giant repository of knowledge, and that's where she goes to discover the book. And so, so there's a point there where she's furtively going through pages and spotting the monsters that she encountered only 3 days earlier. And so you are then able to go through and see them as well and go, oh my God. So now she's flicking back to page 12. Now she's going forward to page 38. You can do the same thing that she's doing.
That's awesome. And what was that experience like, building such a fully fleshed out world?
I know world building can be hard, but I think some people can go too deep too soon. One of the things that I did do was just start with a bit of a who, what, how, why. So what is this world? Who's in charge? How do they govern the people? What are they like? I have intentionally made sure there is no theological aspect to the world. So there's no mention of gods or anything like that. I wanted to stay away from anything that was religious based. I wanted to focus very much on just humanity and what humanity does, irrespective of beliefs and so forth, and make it very much about how we live in the world we live in. So that was one aspect that I had to ensure I did. It does mean there are some, you're writing lines and of dialogue or whatever, and there are phrases that you just want to write because it's natural. You go, no, you wouldn't say that if there is no actual God system or belief system, so let's not have that at all. So you got to stay away from certain things. And then, I think also drawing a map helps, getting a visual representation of what is the lay of the land. I also found that challenging because after you've cemented the map, certainly after cementing the map for the first one, here we go, a map, big form. After cementing the map for the first book, when you get to the second book and you go, I need the character to get to this particular area, you're suddenly going, wow, that's like a 4-day journey. What's going to happen in the story for 4 days? That's not just them traveling. So it does mean you get this kind of sub-adventures going on when you're writing the follow-up as well. But yeah, fleshing out the world it's a lot of fun. One of the things that I have done is in the back of both the books, so the back of the first one, there is essentially a bit of a glossary that also takes you through all of the places and who is the ruling baron there. And there's a follow-up in the back of the second one. There is some bonus content, kind of medieval ads, if you will, for things within. So there's an ad for the Bestiarum Noctis. there's an ad for a dice game that they play within this book as well. So again, part of how do you flesh it out? You can do lots of really interesting little things that allow people to understand this could be a real world in a fantasy setting, rather than just being the same standard place.
I love books that have glossaries at the back of them, because it really does make you feel like, oh, this is a real place. Like, this could be a place that you go to, and I can understand what they're talking about and understand how they live on a day-to-day.
Well, part of it for me as well is in the fantasy world that I have created. So most classical fantasy with swords and shields and castles is equivalent to our own real history of the Middle Ages. Knights on horseback, castles, all the whole works, a feudal system. And then also the folklore belief of creatures in the night and living in, fairies and goblins and so forth. So what I did was base it very much around that broad period of time. All the monsters that I'm using are not from, again, classical fantasy literature or even Dungeons and Dragons. I've actually done the research of what did in the 1300s, what did they believe goblins were? What did they believe were the powers of goblins and trolls and so forth? So I've based it very much on our true history of folklore, but also the Middle Ages was a period of great innovation and invention. It was the birth of sciences. Things like gunpowder was invented in the 8th century. Cannons were first appearing in the 13th century. Magnifying glasses, I think, were 11th century. Spectacles around the same time. So I've allowed those things to also happen in the fantasy world. And because that can sometimes be jarring for readers, particularly for readers who have read a lot of classic fantasy where they don't have these kinds of technologies, I have in the second one at the back also had a little bit of an explanation on some of those things that talks about when some things were invented, why they're in this story, because I'm also a nerd, a massive nerd. So there's a scene in this book. Again, I don't want to give it away, but there's a scene in this book where somebody who is trapped in a cave has to make a weapon with very limited resources. And I found a way. And in the back, I explain the science behind it of this is possible. This is actually real. You can find this with this in this type of mine, and you can do this. And here's what you can do. Here's how you can actually make this work.
I love this so much. Like, I love when things are accurate and you can verify them. I'm intrigued and I want to read it.
There's also as humanity is, after the first book, having a massive loss against the monsters, they are now doing their own uprising to fight back against the monsters. And so they are doubling down on the invention of new weapons, of new war machines. And I needed something that was far more powerful than, again, a traditional catapult or trebuchet from medieval times. And I actually found there's a aerospace engineer in the UK who, in his spare time, invents new versions of catapults and trebuchet. And he invented a flywheel trebuchet that has, and he built this thing and has it in his farm property, and shows a video of him launching this thing, and it launches like something like 5 or 6 times the distance of a classic medieval trebuchet. And so you go, right, he's found this new way of doing something, and it's not new technology, it's old physics of having a giant spinning wheel that's launching the projectile rather than a counterbalance and so forth like they used to do. And spinning wheels have been around for, couple of thousand years. So in my story, I have these flywheel trebuchets thanks to him.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm so intrigued. I love this so much.
Thank you.
I do want to shift gears a little bit into your writing experience, and what a typical day looks like for you now. So when do you typically find the time to write, and what does that process look like?
Certainly on the first one, it was during COVID, rolling up sleeves and doing it. As it got closer and closer to publication, I was going through the editorial phase. It was happening between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And this is when I actually was working. So I was doing my full day job, and then coming home, having family time, having time with my daughter, my wife, dinner, TV, and then when they go to bed, I would stay up for another 4 hours and then be bleary-eyed the next day because this is what I needed to do to fit in all the aspects of my life. For the second one, I've found a better balance. So finding times, yes, sometimes late at night still, but also finding times early in the mornings, like now, where people are still in bed. Finding times when they're away, and allowing the process to happen as part of my life rather than this thing that's kind of happening after hours, hidden from my life. It's very helpful to have a very supportive family. Sometimes my wife will tell me she feels like a bit of an author widow because there I am, another 4 or 5 hours furthering away on the keyboard. But yeah, it's making sure that you have that support where she says, I know this is the process. I know that if you have an idea, you've got to sit down, you've got to work it. So she's very supportive, but I also then have to respect that support and make sure that I am devoting time back.
Lovely. And when you do sit down to write, is it typically digital or pen and paper?
So digitally, my entire stories start with an idea, a core concept as a note in my iPhone. From there, you're fleshing out other ideas, you're starting to join pieces together, and then I sit down in Microsoft Word and then start putting those notes in, breaking them apart a little bit. And when I've broken them apart and I've got essentially 12 to 15 sentences, all separated. Each of those is a really key plot point, and then I transfer those essentially to sticky notes, and the sticky notes go up on a wall. They're actually on a wall on the other side of this room right now, and those sticky notes go up, and I add more sticky notes, and I'll step back and have a look at it, and they're color coded because again I'm a nerd. They're color coded for antagonist versus protagonist to make sure they got even weighting in the story. You don't want lots of yellows and not enough pinks. You want to make sure they're kind of, and also going from yellow to pink, yellow to pink, yellow to pink, so the two halves are both getting screen time, if you will, or page time from the beginning of the book through to the big climax. And then I'm able to add new ones, take some off, join some together. And then when I look at that and finally go, there are no plot holes. There's no corners I'm going to write myself into. Also, no space for writer's block because I know exactly where I have to get to the first climax and the second climax and the false climax and the drama through to the resolution. Then I sit down and each of those sticky notes becomes essentially the chapter title. And then I flesh it out from there. And while this is process going on, I'm still, you get into bed at midnight and suddenly have an idea and you get your phone out and put some notes in it so that in the morning when you come down, there's the notes ready for you to go. Remember, you had this idea that character should also do this in that scene. You're able to plug it in. So I kind of also edit as I go. I'm not somebody who I can't do the process of just get it out, just get the words on the page. Don't worry if there's even mistakes. No, I need sentences to be right enough in my mind and on the page before I can move to the next sentence. Otherwise, it just becomes, again, a stumbling block for me. So by the time I finish the first manuscript, it's kind of the equivalent of like a second or third edit because I'm going back over it and over it and over it as I'm writing it.
I wish I could do that. I need to get it all out first because I'll be stuck on trying to edit something and then never get everything else out.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I try to be a plotter and then it goes a different way and I'm a pantser.
And that's probably why, because you need to get it out because you're pantsing, because as the ideas are happening, you need to express them and get them on the page. Whereas my ideas are happening in the post-it note stage and the sticky note stage. So I'm then able to, when I've got that sticky note that says, Girl with the Knives goes to library and discovers book, I'm able to then know exactly how to construct that as an entire scene and as a chapter with its own little micro narrative arc within the bigger narrative arc. And not worry about getting the words on the page. I'm able to craft it and construct it as I go.
Yeah. It's a brilliant system. I love it. And I love a good sticky note system too. I have a bunch around my desk right now, so I might have to take that from you. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one more question and then give you the floor. What does success as a writer look like for you?
Look, initially success, like most people publishing their first book, success is getting a book deal and so forth. Mine was beyond that. It was getting a movie deal, a movie rights deal, the whole works. And I still want that. But what I have discovered since doing the first one and certainly launching that and going to book conventions and Comic Cons, success is meeting the readers before they've read the book, meeting the readers after they've read the book. It fills you with such joy to meet the people who are immersing themselves in your concept, and those who have read it, who have immersed themselves in more than your concept, in your own imagination and your story. To have moments where I was at my third book convention. It was one of the Comic Cons here in Sydney, and I'm at my stand and I'm talking. You've got 3 or 4 people in front of me, and I'm talking through what the story's about. To give them the pitch. And this woman just came out of the crowd and just shouted across the entire crowd, going, "That is the best book ever!" And I went, "Guys, I don't need to sell anymore. You just heard it from this person here." And she came over and said, I bought it like at the previous Comic-Con, and I read it in like 2 days. And oh my God, it was mind blowing. It's things like that where you go, I've touched somebody. I've actually touched someone's soul, their reading soul, if you will. That for me is success. It's awesome.
I agree 1,000%. Anytime anyone has ever responded to a post I made or messaged me or come up to me after, asked me to sign, I'm like, you resonate? You liked it? Absolutely. I love you. Yes.
Yeah. And again, certainly at Comic Cons, when I'm talking to some people and I don't pitch it this way because it's part of my private life. But if it happens to come up about the idea that the boy is a manifestation of one of my neurodiversities, again, the number of people I get going, "Oh my God, I have that too!" And then you're connecting with them on almost a spiritual, like such a personal level, because now you're talking about things that were very private to you and that were quite private to them. And again, that's what this journey has opened up for me, which is really cool, really quite cool.
I love that. Connecting with people is really what it's about. Makes the human life process so much more bearable. Well, that's really all the time we have. So I'm going to give you the floor to talk about where people can find you and your books and when they can expect The Girl with the Knives.
All right. So my website, M.A.Batten.com. There is there. M.A.Batten.com is where you'll find all the information about me and the books, as well as other projects I've got coming up, as well as links where to get them. Primarily, Dark and the Boy in the Hole, available from Amazon or ordered via good bookstores. I would recommend the paperback from Amazon, but the hardcover I'd recommend via a bookstore because it's a different printing company that is so much better quality. It's the much better looking product. So Amazon or bookstores. Bestiarium Noctis, unfortunately, is only available in paperback online. Hardcover, you have to get it directly from me via my website, just because it's quite a tricky book to get produced in that format. You can also see me on my socials at m.a.batten. And Girl with the Knives launches on the 20th of June, so in just 3 weeks' time. It is a soft launch, coinciding with the very first book convention that I have on. And then there'll be a full-on hard launch with all my ARC readers getting hold of it and so forth beyond that.
So exciting. Well, that's it for this episode of 7 Story Podcast. Thank you so much, M.A.Batten, for joining us and sharing your story. Make sure you check out their series Dark and the Boy in the Hole, and Dark and the Girl with the Knives. Yep. Check out his website, M.A.Batten.com. And until next time, I'm Natasha from 7 Story Publishing.